With the off policy, what's
Yeah.
the new issue?
Well, it's kind of been it's kind of been an open issue all along. It was an issue with the old end user auth. Now it's an issue with the new auth, and that is the request auth claims is not being passed through Mixer.
So I saw that there was, so this has been open for a little bit, right? You filed this a couple weeks ago?
Well,
did you ever?
You actually filed it about a month ago, or maybe even before that. It was filed against 0.6, and that was on the old auth stuff. I figured that one's probably not even valid anymore, so I opened a new one against the new auth thing just today.
Okay.
Because I was testing it and it was not working.
Is this for Jot or?
Yeah, the user on. Yeah, I was in a meeting, I don't know, yesterday, and they claimed that was ready to go. So we should track that down. I'll take an action item to ping the right people about that after this. Well, we have some people here. Maybe we can just get started. Does anyone have anything they want to add to the agenda? I just have some updates and issues. I was out last week, so I don't know exactly where things stood at the end of last week.
I sent another doc to the working group meetings about client-side policy enforcement.
Okay.
So if you want, it's a bit open-ended at this point because there are a lot of unresolved questions. So if you're interested, you can look at it and let me know what you think.
So this is client-side policy enforcement?
Right.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that. I haven't looked at your doc yet. I'll get to that today, I think.
Yeah, Mandar started looking, so he left some comments. I'm gonna try to incorporate.
Yes. So do you want to discuss that now, or do you want to do it next week and just continue?
I think it's I would want people to look at it first before discussing, I think, because it may benefit from
okay. All right.
comments.
So do you want to talk about any of the comments and feedback you had on client-side telemetry? I know you guys probably discussed it last week. I didn't get a chance to.
We didn't discuss in much detail, but there is just a few sort of questions we need to decide before going into implementation.
Okay.
We need to decide on the actual names for attributes, so we have consensus, and that means that the context reporter or context telemetry needs to be fixed and documented properly. So there's a list of attributes. I'm proposing to add a context reporter type as a name for the client versus server distinction. If that sounds reasonable, we can use that. If there's some issue with that, we can probably change it.
That sounds okay to me. I don't know, were there any objections, or did anyone comment on that?
Not really, but it seems we'll need to be able to sort of extend it in the future to more than client and server.
Is anybody
it cannot be a Boolean.
Are you not able to hear?
I can sit closer to Mike.
Is anyone there that can hear? Are we?
Yeah, I can hear everything just fine.
Oh, okay.
Right, so I was saying that we need to be able to extend to more than the client and server in the future, because there are gateways, there is ingresses, all kinds of proxies that might potentially come up. So having a string is a more flexible option. And then we'll also propose to add the ID type, context reporter ID thing for the actual name of the proxy. So we can distinguish between different clients and different servers. And there's an unresolved issue there with the names for VMs, because we don't know how to name them. That has been in the issue in the past. I don't think we know still how it's going to work. So I don't think it's going to be, it's not just an issue in this document, it's an overall problem.
Yes. So for me, I feel like those are fine attributes, and that scheme works for me. I don't know if anyone has any objections there or not.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Well,
Sure.
that's an objection. I think that's consensus.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to help with parallelizing work. As you can...
the reporter ID and type are so many times the thing that we finally want to derive is whether it was reported client side or server side or intermediate. So yeah, so look, if we know the reporter, then we have to compare it with the actual payload to know if the reporter is the client or the server, right? That's the general idea, right?
Yeah, the idea is that we will need to modify all the queries we do right now to qualify with a predicate saying context reported type equals server, because that's what it really means right now, versus context reported type equals client for the new dashboards.
Okay, so okay, so that's actually better, because otherwise we could have actually had an equality clause on context.reporter ID equals one of the dimensions, but it's because type is so often used and server and client are the two dominant types. I agree. Those are the two, and then ILBs and other things would come in whenever. So yeah, I think that
right. Yeah.
makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, there is a use case when the client and server are the same thing in a way, because that's a ILB. So
Yep.
that needs to be sort of covered as well.
Yep.
Were there other open questions with that?
No, there's a lot of questions about actual implementation, and there's a lot of changes going on in the Envoy side with the mixer filter and moving to the V2 configuration file. So, but there is so I propose finer grained configuration, because, for example, when the proxy decides to change the destination service, that happens during routing. And the way the Envoy structures its workflow is that mixer filter kicks in first, and we need to be able to override whatever mixer filter decides during routing. That means we need to insert configuration into the route themselves. That's the only tricky case.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to having the V2 mixer stuff actually usable.
Right. In terms of status, yeah, we have an issue with the server side reporting, so that needs to be fixed first, I think.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about for client-side telemetry, or?
So the other kind of related part in client-side telemetry is that we have to decide if we keep both those reports open by default, right? It would seem that a more reasonable default is report telemetry client side and do policy check server side, and users can of course change the defaults. But I think we have to think about that and like put that.
Yeah, I wonder what's the actual cost, like in terms of performance and load that causes.
Report is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Client-side check is more damaging, I think.
I mean, report is cheap or semi-cheap. Well, report is cheap in terms of latency. It's not cheap in terms of CPU.
Why not?
Essentially, we're doing twice as much work, right? Like if you think about it that way.
Well, no, because but reports, we end up accumulating them on the proxy for a second or something. So it's like one extra RPC per second.
It's one extra RPC, but we're compressing it on every call, and then mixer decompresses the whole thing. And so we pay the cost somewhere. It's not continuous. It's in bits and pieces. But the question is, doing it both client and server side doubles that cost. And then the question is it reasonable to just keep that as the default, or do client side, like I said, client side telemetry and server side, then people can turn both of them on if they want to.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking at this with the lens of the the config model we're going to have in a few months, where we'll have service config that describes the behavior of everything that's coming into a service, and we'll have consumer config to describe what happens on the way out of a given workload. And it's totally reasonable to say the default consumer config is empty. There's no telemetry collected by the consumer. There's no consumer side quotas being applied or anything like that. And it's just extra features you can turn on if you need.
Yeah. I mean, so I worry if we turn on only one or the other, like about the config that's written, assuming both are going to be there, right? Like, do we start losing server side, like server request counts that we depend on now, or like what? How do we write config that's flexible based on which thing you've toggled on?
I think that is exactly what needs to be thought through. But because just by saying that you're turning this one flip bit on, you're doubling the methods collection, and the differential between those two is, I mean, we know that there is a difference, but it's very small. So is doubling the data justified by that extra cost? And if it is not, then we should give operators the choice to turn one on or off.
Yeah. So again, part of why we want a system like Galley to be in the middle of config is so that we can make optimizations to the system based on what the user asks. So if the user's current policies never state that they're looking at client-side metrics, egress metrics, then we won't collect these metrics and I won't send them to Mixer. In the short term, the user has to configure saying, well, okay, send the even if my config says I'm using those attributes, I still have to go and set a bit in proxy to have it send those client-side metrics. But before the end of the year, we'll be able to do this automatically. So I'd like us to look at this in that context. Right? So based on what the user specified in config, this is what I'm looking at. We then figure out where's the best place to collect that information.
Okay.
Right. So that says, I think we want these knobs in place, and in the short term, it'll be a pain in the ass. The user has to go and configure the proxy manually, and by 1.1 or 1.2, this won't be an issue anymore, and it'll just kind of work. So I do think I don't know what's our default stance overall as a platform. When you install Istio out of the box, is it designed to just be secure and not slow you down so much? Or all the bells and whistles turned on, and where there's a choice to be made there, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could take the short-term approach of having 3 different configurations for Mixer, right? One assuming only server-side, one assuming only client-side, and one assuming both. And
is only client-side useful?
It depends how much you trust the network, right? Like what happens to the requests once they leave Istio?
I think many times client side is in my view more useful, because if all the clients of a service are having poor performance, then the fact that the service itself says I'm great is, well, it's still a good debugging tool, but what you really want is how it is perceived by its clients.
Okay,
so between the two, the client side is actually more useful than the server side, because when someone is looking at an overall graph and they say that, oh, A to B, like the call latency is going up, the final number that we want is that A to B is going up, not whether it's going up just over there or here, right? Like if it goes up, it's going to go back. It's going to back up all the way.
So this raises the interesting issue of who owns that data.
Right.
right, the client-side metrics, is that the client's issues, or does that belong to the server, or both?
I think that's orthogonal, because the client latency can go up because of network. It can go up because the client is sending the data in a particularly bad way to the server. And that's why only latency perceived by that client has gone up, right? Because now the server is doing more work just on that path. So I think ownership, if we can keep it completely separate, that would be
definitely be simpler.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean,
But
you will need to do joins. That complicated story because
the description you just gave is, as a service producer, I'd like to know if any of my clients are experiencing weird stuff, and the only, well,
Do you?
yeah. So I think I'd want to be able to see those metrics. I don't know if I should be able to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at some sense, you can only control the things that you can control, right? And so, like, the client is across the network partition from you. Like, what as a service producer can you do if their latency is increasing, but no one else is?
Oh, but that's the thing, right? From a diagnostic standpoint, I could go and try and figure out, why is their traffic different? Why am I not seeing this on my side? And it's a totally like, if your components are crashing, it's totally fine to go see the caller of your component and see what are they doing.
right. And so there are three perspectives here, right? There is the service owner of the service, the owner of the client workload or client service, and then the mesh operator.
Yeah.
Mesh operator does care about both ends. So which is why ownership is orthogonal.
Ultimately, if you're running a service, I think you just want both, right? You want your server-side view of your service, and you want your client-side view of things leaving your service, right?
Yeah,
And
but
so
the open issue is, do you want to see the client-side view of stuff talking to you?
No, so I would argue that if you take server-side metrics, you can know who's calling you, and you can look at, from that caller, this request that you receive, right? But, like, you don't want to see faults injected on the client side for your service, right? That's not something that you care about, in some sense, right? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think what you said before, though, in terms of scope or kind of sphere of responsibility, as the producer, if all of my metrics look good, and one particular client is having trouble talking to me, and it doesn't show up in my metrics, then it's their problem. And I can't do anything about it, so I don't care about their metrics. It's their problem. So I kind of like that answer, because it simplifies the data model quite a bit.
it also feels to me it's a second level question, because I mean, the mesh operator should have visibility into all of the data, and then there should be another restricted view of the data that is presented to service owners. So it's really direct access.
Yeah, so think about it in terms of service config again. If I'm a service operator and I define all the configuration for my service in one service config, and that has all the metrics I want to collect, all the mixer rules, and all that kind of stuff. If I want to see what my clients are doing, I would need new attributes that is somehow client-related attributes that I can see and apply policies against and log. And well, now I've what's the expression? Crossed the Rubicon or whatever. I now have access to the client data. If I don't have these attributes and I can't see client data, then there's no good place. We don't have a console for the mesh operator. Effectively, we have service views. The mesh operator could go in and look at the service view of the client and look at the service view of the producer, but there's no good top level. We won't apply policies at the mesh level in that way. Right. Or at least I don't understand how this was all fit together in such a model. It's
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. We can add this discussion to the doc and probably continue it there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can follow this up in emails and things like that as well. Madar, do you want to give an update on remote adapters and the work going on there?
Yeah. So one PR, Sunny's PR that does the static, which is adapter config YAML to proto is already in. It is subject to some refactoring, but we decided to put it in because it was kind of blocking the other PR. And then there is an API PR that was merged today, which just fleshes out the value types. So previously, value types were used as a metadata or as a marker, and then CodeGen translated that to actual Go types directly. But now these are going to go over wire. So now these are actually concrete types. So the values are now concrete types, and they actually contain data. So that went in, and then my PR should go in probably tomorrow. Should be out for review by tomorrow, which does it actually converts it to a fully formed instance.
Converts what to a fully formed instance?
So it takes a YAML, takes our instance config as one input, and takes attribute bag as the other input, and produces bytes.
Okay.
So I have a question related to the out-of-proc adapter work. So you guys can hear me?
yes.
Yes.
So earlier, the adapters and templates were not namespaced. So they were compiled into Mixer, and there was only one adapter with name Prometheus or one template with name Metric. And now in the out-of-proc adapter work, we are doing this work where this information of what adapters a Mixer can talk to or what templates it supports are coming through custom resources. So do we want them to be namespaced, or should they be, there can only be one template called Metric in the universe of Mixer, or there can only be one adapter called Prometheus? Or with the other option is we have Metric inside namespace, STO default, and then other Metric inside some other namespace, or Prometheus for that matter. So what it means is if we're having a namespace, then every instance config that the operator is writing will have to reference to the right template name. So when I'm writing a request size instance configuration or request latency, then I'll have to refer to metric dot my namespace, as opposed to right now they just say my instance name is request latency and template name associated. The template that I'm defining is metric, and here is the dimensions, here is the value. So what do you guys think? We can do either.
It's going to create a more difficult user experience, right? Or confusing user experience, because so especially if we don't namespace it,
yeah,
move things around, then they will fail in really unpredictable ways.
Yeah, I feel like we had planned all along to have namespaces for all of these things, right? Like adapters were meant, like there's a pseudo namespace in some of them, and like that was the plan for all of this.
Yeah, so I would say that we could have implicit namespace for the existing adapters, and then explicit for everything else, and then.
So are the templates themselves going to be resources?
So templates were, yes, if we want to namespace them, then there is going to be a custom resource definition for adding template. So you can say the kind is template, and here is the base64 encoding of its definition, and its name is metric. And same for adapters. You can say the kind is an adapter, and here is the name of the adapter called Prometheus, and here is the base64 encoding of its adapter config, as well as the base64 encoding of the templates I support.
And so we're going to take the base64 encoded template and then push it into Kubernetes?
Yes. So the custom resource that has this base64 encoded string will be read by Mixer. It will push to Kubernetes config server, read by Mixer, and decoded by Mixer as a file descriptor, and we would start interpreting it. And then operator can write config against it.
Yeah, everything is turning into data now. Like not all that used to be in code, now all that is data.
It seems strange that Mixer would actually be writing CRDs though.
No, Mixer shouldn't write CRDs. Mixer should read.
That's what Sunny just said.
No. So Mixer. No. So there are 2 or 3 CRDs that are defined by Mixer framework. One is a adapter CRD and a template CRD, and the operator, not the operator, but with the build of Mixer itself, we'll be having. So if there are for built-in templates, metric and stuff, we'll have some custom resources referencing to the CRD.
So you can call it default configuration.
Default, yes.
Yeah, so that's fine. And now, if I want to use a template for a new out-of-proc adapter, how does that template definition get into the system?
So for that, if you have an out-of-proc adapter and the template is only for your adapter, then you define a custom resource in a YAML, and you say the kind is an adapter, name is my custom adapter, and my adapter configuration is the base64 or whatever your proto is. And the templates I support are these 3 templates or 1 template, and it is a base64 encoding of whatever template you have defined.
But that's the thing. I'm trying to understand the details here. Where is this base64 stuff? How does it get into Istio?
Okay, where is it coming from? So the base64 stuff is you run the proto-c command to get the transitive closure of all the protos, and then you build before that.
In the code of the adapter.
No, not. This is like a command line tool that we will provide. We'll provide some scripts or something like that. This part of their build, right? Okay. They build their stuff, then they produce the transitive closure, and then we'll give them a little tool that packages it as a CRD. And then that they can shove it into.
Yeah. So
that's the part I'm trying to get to. So that means now, if I want to use an external adapter as the operator, not as the producer of the adapter, as the operator, I need to take that CRD file and push it to Kubernetes.
That's correct.
Okay.
And that can actually be published on a well-known URL, right?
Yeah.
So like Apogee can publish theirs at like a well-known URL saying, okay, just kube up CTL apply, and here's the URL, and that should create the definitions.
Yeah, so Mandar and I talked about this thing. So we can, for the adapter developer, there will be we can probably, and this tool can be adapter developer or operator, mainly for adapter developer. You say you run this tool, and here is my proto, which defines my operator adapter config, and here is the proto for the templates. And that tool eventually just runs the transitive closure, compiles everything, and finally gives you a YAML that you can stick on your website, where every operator that wants to consume or adapter just copies that YAML, which has this weird base64 string, and sticks it into a custom resource, and then do kubectl create.
Okay. All right. So in that context, then the actual templates will be actual CRDs in Kubernetes. Will have actual namespaces. So any attempt for us to not use namespaces in our side of configuration is fundamentally broken. If we just use canonical short names.
So there is actually one bit of curveball here, right? Is that the name of, so many of our resources derive their names from the location in the config hierarchy, right? Or handlers and other things too. With templates, we have an option, right? Is there a globally unique name for a template, or does template's name also depend on its hierarchy in your particular config? So for example, if one of my templates is like google.im.something, right? In some ways it would make sense for that to have a globally unique name, right? Because like it's the way that you talk to Google IAM. It shouldn't depend on where you place that resource in your config hierarchy.
And on a related topic, not only is it where do you put it, what permissions does it have? Right?
Yes.
So if I create a template in my namespace with my permissions, what does that mean to the rest of the mesh?
I think templates is, we could definitely start off with the position that template, like adding a template is a mesh level thing, right? Because you're actually adding a whole new functionality to Mixer. So the mesh operator gets to do that. But the question still remains that the name, is that the name of the resource, or is that the name that's claimed by the template?
Okay, so how about this then? We only support templates in the system namespace. The name that you specify in the user's config is the name of the resource, and if there's no namespace prefix, it implies it's a system namespace, and then everything just works today.
Well, but what about the actual? So, what about the name of the template, or maybe so
Ignored.
So again, my example of like google.im, let's say that's a template. Which one of those things would be that? Because it shouldn't now matter whether it's an Istio namespace or any other namespace. The template is called google.im, and any other configuration that any operator is going to write is going to be against the google.im template.
So currently what the model we have is the name of the template is what you define in your proto file. So it's the package name, the last segment of the package name, right? So either we ditch that concept and always the name of the template is the one that the custom resource has claimed in its metadata, or we say we don't really care about what name you have specified in the metadata. The name of the template, which should be globally unique in a mesh, is the name that once we load the proto, the name that we can fetch, and that becomes the key. And
yes, look, if all the stuff is in one namespace, all the CRDs are in a single namespace, then there's no problem. There's not going to be any So where I want to go is to say that, look, if you have templates that are in multiple namespaces, the namespace is what's supposed to identify them. If we have this ulterior name that needs to be unique across namespaces, you just kind of broke the resource model. In one namespace, I can add something that interferes with something in a different namespace, and that's just wrong. Right? So I think we need to ditch the local name concept and just use the resource name. And if we line things up properly, it makes no difference to the customer. And customers are used to using fully qualified resource names in Kubernetes. That's kind of what everything is about. So they could use istio.system.mytemplate or just my template.
But again, going back to the question of what if it's a well-known outside template, right? Like if you want to start using google.im and we have a direct connection to it, or we want to establish a connection to it, and we create this resource, that name is already namespaced. Like it is google.im, for example, and it has got nothing to do with istio.system or probably, right? Because it's its own thing. So,
but it's not a resource in an Istio mesh though at that point.
it's not, but you just created a resource for it in the Istio namespace, in the Istio system namespace. Would you, and like what this is suggesting is that we use the mesh local alias to refer to the actual resource.
Yeah. Because the fact that it exists on a website and you can download it does not help me within my mesh itself. I need to install it in my mesh, and the only place we let you install the damn thing is in the system namespace. So that's going to guarantee uniqueness at that point, and all the right permissions and everything just works.
What about any example configs that the operator, that the publisher may have? They are. I want to make sure that when someone tries to do this, you don't have to go through a whole bunch of like replace stuff just to get it to work, right? So if it's just one place, then I think it's okay, right? But essentially, like, we define a template, change the name, but any other configuration that's based on the template, right, that is in the examples, will have to change once they start using it.
Well, but if every use case, if all the resources are always in the system namespace, then the examples will be written to that in that way as well. And
Okay. Yeah. So then it would be called istiosystem.google_im or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's to your benefit it's to everybody's benefit if the names are consistent.
Yep. Okay.
So are we saying the name that is embedded inside the template itself, we need to use that at least to make the API definition is derived from that, right? So what the adapter is implementing is using the name that is not that has nothing to do with the resource name.
Correct, which is the right split.
Okay. So what it means is, as an operator, he gives the name of the template is named by him through his resource name, and he refers in his universe. He just references when he's writing rules and when he's writing whatever he uses or instances. He uses the name of the resource name, and then we can link stuff, wire stuff as based on just that information. But when we are making calls over the wire, we use the name of the function that we have to call over gRPC will be based on the name of the template, because that is the API that the other guy has implemented.
Which is namespaced in itself?
No.
No,
because I mean that one right now, the template name is just the last segment of the proto package name.
Okay, so that we would need to fix that too. Because now what you just described would let me add two resources that are as far as the operator is concerned, they're different.
Yeah, but not from the adapter.
Places, but they both implement a metric template that's different from one another.
Maybe we should have a separate doc that sort of walks through the naming of these things and clearly lays it out. Because I feel like it's easy to forget things or lose track, and we should have this written down clearly.
Okay. Yeah, I can drive that. I'll just write that.
So before we run out of time there, I had, I can't see the content. Jay from our Stackdriver team wanted to talk about source.
Yeah, he put it on the topic list, so we can turn it over to him.
Cool, thanks. Appreciate the time. I don't know how many of you I've met before. I was sort of involved with Istio a little back at the beginning, and I since transferred over to the Stackdriver team. So one of the things that we think is important in Stackdriver is being able to graphically represent the mesh. What services are communicating with which other services, and I know there's a question about whether services and workloads communicate. So let me just say that the most generic possible way. right? What customer-facing functionality is talking to what other customer-facing functionality, and what are the transaction rates? What are the error rates? What are the latency distributions? And to be able to draw that graphically and to be able to annotate the edges with the traffic data is a super important part of the solution, because when we talk about Istio, I think it has a few different value props, right? There's definitely the value prop of turning security and quota and all this other kind of config into code and not having to do crazy network stuff. That's absolutely a value prop to kind of the deployment side. But there's this huge benefit to the operations side, which is that if everything is kind of standardized as a service, and you can look from the customer-facing understanding of the world on down, and you can kind of up-level everything from just a bunch of infrastructure to define pieces of functionality working together and knowing exactly how they're connected and how they're talking to one another. The benefits to the customer are astronomical, particularly in the education space, who does, people knowing what's actually running in their environment and how it's built. And the second benefit, obviously, kind of problem triage is a huge benefit. Like just being able to go, oh, here's the graph, there's the choke point in the graph, let me go solve that. And customers, when we talk to this, I don't want to make this about commercial because I know we're very developer focused, but all of us work for companies, right? And we all have customers. And when we talk to customers about this, they kind of visibly get excited, get out of their chair and are like, when can we have it? How quick can we have that? That's what we want. And so with all that preamble, I apologize, a little wordy. What we'd really like to figure out is to make sure that the data model and the stats model support us being able to draw that graph. Now, there can be some level of indirections, right? I'm not going to dictate that it has to look exactly in the data model the way I want to put it on the screen, right? So if there's indirection between a service and a workload or other concepts, as long as it's something that we can programmatically collapse, we're good with that. But we need to be able to identify what's a service. We need to be able to identify what traffic is going from which service to which other service. And if we have those two things in kind of any way, shape, or form, we'll programmatically deal with the rest. So that's kind of the high level issue. And I think this is something that we've, Google at least has been thinking about from the beginning. Again, I was around the Istio thing a couple years ago. This is a kind of a solution that we always had in mind. And now we're getting to the point where the technical nuts and bolts, like, okay, can we do it? How do we do it?
All right, so I've been writing a doc for the last several hours this morning on this topic, which I'm going to send out a little later today. So we have a fundamental architectural issue at the foundation of things, is that services do not actually produce traffic. Services just are targets for traffic. And we effectively have no way to tell. All we know is traffic is a particular set of a particular workload, and there's no direct correlation to a service. We know a particular workload can implement service 1, 2, 3, but when that workload turns around and traffic service, we can't tell whether the service 1, 2, 3 that's sending the traffic is just the workload. So there's this, we just can't discriminate on the who's sending traffic.
So that seems like I'm sure there were technical reasons for that architectural decision.
No, stop. So that's the thing. It's not a decision. It's just a state of things. From a practical standpoint, there's a single binary that's running that implements multiple services. And that single binary can make calls, can open sockets to an arbitrary number of outgoing services. And you just don't know what's the relationship between what came into the workload and what came out. It's one binary. So it's not about how we've architected Istio, it's just a fact of that's how it works. That's how it works within Google as well. Just that kind of information just does not exist. So the only way to extract this is if the service binary itself, when it's issuing a request, if that code in there said, okay, issue this request on behalf of service 1 or on behalf of service 2, then we could tell. But without changing the binary, it's just stuff coming out of that binary, and we can't really figure out on behalf of whom it's coming out.
Right. So there's a decision to either make those sorts of efforts or not make those sorts of efforts. I guess what I'm saying is from the operational, and then there's probably arguments to be, why not to do such a thing? Maybe it's complexity. Maybe there's other challenges. What I'm saying is from the architectural perspective, from the operational perspective, this potentially eliminates one of the greatest operational benefits, and frankly, again, one of the things that makes customers, super happy.
Step away.
So there's lots of ways that we can address this issue, right? We can address it by assigning a canonical service for workloads for telemetry purposes. You probably don't want to do that for authorization or something more
you actually
sensitive,
don't want to
right?
do it for telemetry either.
Well, it depends, right? And you can also, for stuff that comes in to a service, we can pass information along, and as the context is propagated from the call through to the other call, we can trace the service calls there as well, right? So it's not entirely without a workaround, I guess is my.
So I mean, workarounds, as long as they're sustainable, and not brittle and fall over in 6 months when somebody stresses it, or that's fine. Like I said, there's no particular operational purity I'm trying to impose on the thing. I just want to basically make sure that within the next couple months that we'd be able to wire up something that kind of proves that this picture is possible to build, and that the traffic is possible to segregate, and that we can telegraph to the world, yes, this higher level of operational overview is coming.
Yeah, so the document I'll send later will have actual pictures in it. The point is, in the end, the view of services, of circles that are services and edges that is traffic between services is naive. It's not how it works. But we can achieve something that's very similar and delivers the same benefit to the customer. So I'm going to paint that picture. So just step away from the cliff. It's not worth jumping yet. I think you'll be.
I'm not jumping. I'm sitting down. I'm calm. I'm in my chair.
Yeah. So it's just we need to look at this from the holistic view of things. How do we configure the system in a world of consumers and service producers, where consumers are not themselves services? How do we visualize metrics? How do we apply policies in that context? It all needs to work together. And the canonical service thing, I went through that in detail in this talk this morning. There's several substantial issues with this that make it so it's actually a dangerous proposition from a security and operational standpoint.
And by the way, I do understand there are corner cases, like what if the sender is not a service, or what if the receiver is not a service. I totally get that, but we should at least make sure that if the sender and receivers are services, we have a good solution, right? Because customers don't have to adopt everything that's available to them, but if they do adopt it, they should get a really nice out-of-the-box experience.
Correct, and I think the model that I'll be proposing is if you follow best practices, where you have one service per workload, one security principle per service, then you're in a beautiful place, everything works great. But the key is that we need to support where that's not support properly, where this is not the ideal, where the ideal is not realized. Because I think it's going to be very, very common that the ideal is not realized in our customer deployments. So we can't just, we need a smooth transition path.
Yeah, and speaking of smooth transition paths, I think we need a way that takes us from where we are today, which is a situation that doesn't support multiple services per workload for all of these things, into and a timeline for this transition into the system that it allows more complex expressions there. Because we have to, we need a plan for 1.0 and what the next stages of this look like and when we're making this transition as well, not just the plan for how we're going to support it.
Yeah.
So.
All I wanted to do was change a couple of attributes, and then I stepped into this mess.
Jay, this is
So Jay, let's continue the discussion, and I think we'll probably by next week we can circle back in this forum and kind of close that discussion.
Okay. All right. So, by the way, was somebody else trying to jump in there? I thought I heard somebody try to speak, but their voice was soft.
This is Jeff Mendoza. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've been working on a proof of concept for this. Just started with Quentin Smith. So if you want to chat, I'd be happy to also chat about it as well.
Great, thanks. And I'm working with Quentin too, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's great. All right, cool. Well, thanks for the listen. I look forward to what the next doc and proposal are.
The only other thing I had on the agenda was just to talk about some of the stuff that's coming up soon. I expect to see some of you at KubeCon in 2 weeks. I think in the intermediate time, we're going to do some more design work around the Direct API and figure out what we want to do with the Direct API and how that might work. So look forward to some documents related to that. We'll obviously have some more news about client-side reporting and the impacts on metrics and dashboards moving forward, as well as we're starting to push more into how do we push signals into analytics pipelines. So there should be some new stuff to talk about in the coming weeks there as well. I don't know if anyone else has other things that they want to talk about that are coming up or not, but that's sort of just something I wanted to mention is look out for documents related to those items coming forward. Oh, and I guess the other thing is, it looks like the V2 mixer, the mixer working with the Envoy V2 stuff is in the final stages, so that should happen by today or tomorrow, I think, based on what I heard. So that's exciting.
Why is Mixer involved in this?
To switch to the XDS stuff and Envoy, the mixer filter config was not working. So if you test it out using the V2 proxy, you would lose Mixer functionality.
Okay, so it's not really Mixer that's kaput; it's the it's the client side.
Well, yes, but so all of the stuff we're talking about would stop working in V2, and so that's a known issue, and that's hoping to be resolved in the next day or two.
Good.
I don't know. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about or mention or? Okay. Well, talk to everyone next week.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.